Well, hello, and welcome to another chapter of our podcast series on I've Decided to Live 120 Years. We are so glad that each of you have taken the time to continue this journey with us. We have had some really special guests and have explored some very important topics in weeks past, and we hope you'll stay with us as we continue to go forward. Throughout this series, we've been talking to people who have made the decision to change their lives. They've made a fundamental choice about how they choose to live their lives today and how they intend to live their lives going forward. Hopefully that they will get to make choices that will give them the opportunity to live for 120 years. And if not, maybe every day until they have their last day will be a joyous and wonderful day. We have a very special guest today. I'm really pleased that Linda Yoonjin is with us today. And she is really a very special friend of mine who I've come to know in working on this show. Born in a Buddhist family near a monastery in South Korea, she grew up to become a producer and director of Brain Education and the TV host of Change Podcast, which is really very important work. Before joining that work, she was an event coordinator for celebrities in Hollywood and also coordinated events for the Architecture and Design Museum in Los Angeles, famed Museum Row. Welcome, Linda, and how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm so happy to be on this podcast show with you.
That's great. Well, let me start by asking your reaction to a perspective that Ilchi Lee presents in the book as we talk about today, focusing in on joy and happiness and how we can achieve joy, how we can achieve happiness, and really what joy and happiness means in our life. Clearly, we're not talking about frivolous things, but we're talking about really serious things, but also fun things. And here's what Ilchi Lee observes in his book. He says, we want to live the life we really want. We want to be happier. We want to express what we feel, and we want to connect with people instead of living buried by work. The key to living a life of completion is living the life you really want, a life you won't regret when you die. So to live a life of completion, you first have to incessantly ask yourself, what kind of life do you really want to live? What is it I really want? I had asked myself, he said, this question since I was a child, but I failed to find an answer that was satisfactory until I was 30. I could have lived without knowing, but I wasn't happy. Outwardly, I was living a normal life, but inwardly, I felt like my life was an empty shell. And finally, he says, it occurred to me that I could no longer ignore the unresolved, most fundamental questions of life, that I had to dig deeply until I got to the very bottom of these issues and was able to find an answer. You have had some very interesting transitions in your own life, and I wonder how you react to that, and what are your observations as you look back on your journey of self-discovery?
So when I read that passage from the book, I felt like, oh my goodness, I wasn't alone. Because I felt exactly the same thing that he did. You know, he mentioned something about that empty shell that he felt up until he was 30. And, you know, that number is pretty significant for me too, because I'm actually turning 30 this year. So that empty shell feeling I want to kind of talk a little bit more about, because I had that sense of emptiness that I couldn't really explain for most of my life. Since I was a child, I felt like I was going to school, doing the things that society told me to do, but I felt like there was something I was missing. And it was something that really bothered me and kind of ate at me for so long too. But I wasn't even able to know what I really wanted at that time. And I think
how did you sort of figure out and start to think about what that missing thing was, what that misalignment was?
So similar to Ilchi Lee that he mentioned, that hole in my heart was eating away at me for so long that I finally came to a point where I said, you know what, I cannot live like this anymore. And you know, that point where you say enough is enough, that's an interesting point, because that's a point they say in Tibetan Buddhism, that's the point that leads you to self-discovery. That point where we finally say enough and we choose a different path for our lives.
Wow, that is really beautiful. I'll tell you, that's so poignant. You know that it sort of reminds me of some work I used to do earlier in my career as a health professional, and that was working with people who were suffering from addiction to substances.
Mm.
And it was so many people that I met in therapy sessions who would say to me, finally, the moment that they made the change was, I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that's sort of the kind of thing here where you just finally say, I've just had enough. Tell me, as you started to, once you made that realization, then you have to, of course, take steps. You have to act. And that first starts usually with setting goals, where you align your goals with your sense of your highest self. How did you go through that process with yourself?
Right. So I grew up in a very kind of strict household, and I feel a lot of people have that pressure from their family to be a certain person, right? Society expects you to be a certain person. Your family expects you to be a certain person. And I kind of just went along that path, doing what my family wanted, doing what I thought other people wanted of me. But when I got to that point of, I cannot live like this anymore, I had to kind of take a step back and think, okay, what do I like to do? What do I want from my life, instead of what does my mom want from my life? What does my dad want from my life?
That is very difficult for people to do. And I expect that in your culture, where family is so tightly bound with the individual, even as you become an adult, that must have been, that must have required a great deal of personal fortitude and courage.
Yes, because I had to overcome this big disappointment I got from my parents when I told them that in my culture, you expect people to be either a doctor or a lawyer. That's it. No other options. No other occupations exist on the earth except doctor or lawyer. So I went my whole life trying to be that lawyer person that my parents wanted. But when I took a step back and realized that's not what I wanted for my life, I had to really dig up the courage to face that disappointment I will get. But I thought, okay, is it better to get that disappointment for maybe 1 year in my life and the rest of my life I am fulfilled? Or is it better for me to be disappointed at myself my whole life while everyone else is approving me, but I'm disappointed in my own self? Which one was better for me? I chose the one where I was disappointed, or my parents were disappointed with me for a little bit, but now they're so happy for me because I'm truly happy.
That's wonderful. And, I think that your story is going to resonate so well with other 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 20-year-olds. But I also have a feeling that there are going to be a lot of 60 and 70-year-olds who are parents or grandparents who might be listening to you and decide, maybe my expectations for my children and grandchildren ought not to be what's really important. Maybe it's their expectations for themselves. And so maybe this will affect not only people your age, but also people who are older.
Right.
I certainly hope so.
Right.
One of the things around making this choice about aligning yourself with your happiness versus where you were, with the other work that you were doing, also has to do with the values, about your perhaps your spiritual values, your sense of a higher calling for yourself. Did that enter into your decision, or was it almost all the decision around just whether you were enjoying day by day living?
Well, I feel like ever since I was young, I did have some sort of spiritual sense. Of course, at the time when I was young, I didn't know it was a spiritual sense, but I've always had this longing to become the best person that I could be. And I feel like everyone has that desire to be great. And I feel like that's because everyone has that seed of seeking their highest self. So when we want to improve our lives, when we want to become great, when we want to become the best version of ourselves, that actually is our innate seed to attain that higher self. So I followed that voice.
That is terrific. Well, one of the things that Ilchi Lee does in the book is gives us a little sort of a happiness checklist, some questions that he asks each reader to hear. And you've answered a couple of them, but what he asks us to do is ask ourselves, when was I most joyful? By the way, do you have an image in your mind of when you are most joyful?
Yes. So it's funny because the work I'm doing is exactly what I've always found myself to be most joyful in, which is creating. I've always felt when I create, especially when it's something for the higher good, like creating things that awaken people's consciousness, creating things that inspire people, creating things that create dialogue to progress humanity forward, that kind of stuff, that kind of creation always fueled this fire inside of me that made me feel so happy. And especially if you add that little bit of doing it with other people, not just by myself, but doing it in a community with like-minded people for the same goal, that is what gives me true, deep satisfaction, like my existence matters and has an impact on society.
Oh, that is such a beautiful thought. By the way, can you also, I mean, do you have somewhere in there a beautiful beach with palm trees and the sun and tropical breeze? Is any of that in your formula for when you're joyful?
Of course, but those are just sprinkles on the sundae.
Sprinkles on the sundae. I'll remember that. The other question, I'll give each of our listeners a chance to ask themselves this question: am I happy now? When specifically do I feel happy? Do I feel happy when someone else makes me happy? Do I tend to feel that it's my external environment that is keeping me from being happy? Those are very important questions. And so I think that we start to explore that. Let's take a look at this external environment, because many people feel like I need the world around me to all be perfect or to give me something for me to be happy. But if these external conditions are the requirements for happiness, then of course we're like walking on a tightrope, swayed back and forth by this external environment that pushes us back and forth between happiness and unhappiness. If we're going to be, I think, at least it's my observation, and I think it's Ilchi's as well, that if you're going to be happy, ultimately you have to be able to take charge. What are your thoughts on how you have achieved this, and how can others learn from your experience of being not under the subject or the control of the external world?
Yes. So first of all, I was definitely one of those people who seeked for approval from the outside. So I always felt like if my parents didn't recognize me, if my teachers didn't recognize me, if my peers didn't recognize me, then I didn't have any value. And I think that's the key point. I think society in our system conditions us to always look outside. From when we were in grade school, we're only considered good students if our teachers tell us we're good students, right? And we're only considered a good employee if our boss gives us a raise or does something to make us feel good about ourselves. And I was also in that system, in that mold, and my brain was conditioned to seek approval outside as well. But what helped me discover my own purpose and my own happiness inside without the outside circumstances was I found value inside of me. I saw how I can contribute to society and how I can make my life matter and have a place in this world. And when I found my place, how I could contribute, I started to feel how valuable my existence is. And that's what helped me to find happiness and joy inside of myself. Even if people around me are like, Linda, what are you doing? What are you into? It does not matter because I've never been happier.
That is a beautiful story. I think in addition to that, there's also the perspective that I know that you share as a person who's a leader at the Body and Brain movement, is that we are so fortunate to be alive and living in this wonderful, miraculous universe. And so when we wake up in the morning and we contemplate the mysteries, the magnitude of this thing called life, the fantastic array of creation, it seems that we really shouldn't need other things to give us joy if we simply have the gratitude and appreciation for all of the beauty that is within us and around us.
Right. Yeah, and I think the biggest killer of joy and happiness is comparison. And in our culture, even with social media, this whole celebrity obsessed culture, we are so prone to comparing our lives to other people. But I want to give the audience out there a metaphor. So if you have a house, imagine you have a house. So in that house, there's sofa, there's a table, there's a clock, there's pictures on the wall, there's a flower maybe. There's many components that make that house. But a flower, which is so beautiful inside that vase, if the flower looked at the sofa and said, man, I want to be a sofa. I'm so useless because I'm not the sofa. You know, that's kind of like what we're doing. Every single piece of that furniture in that house has its own place, has its own use, has its own value. But if the flower tries to compare itself to the sofa, it'll never see how beautiful it is alone on itself.
That's a wonderful metaphor and a thought. And we can even extend that even further by recognizing the interrelationship between all of them. So if I am sad today and I decide to sit on a comfortable sofa and I become relaxed and my mind relaxes, and then I look over to the side and I see that beautiful flower, now I'm relaxed, I'm appreciating the beauty of the flower, I'm appreciating the comfort of the chair, and now I begin to go deeper inside of myself, and it opens up my heart, and now I begin to really feel another level of joy. So that flower and the sofa can also conspire to make us happy. Everything is connected, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Let's talk about this a little bit more in terms of the internal life of us. And one of the things that I know that you are involved in is the work of teaching yourself and others around finding true self. Mm-hmm. The true self, Ilchi talks a lot about in this book, 120 Years, as being a key to being able to unlock joy and happiness. How do you understand this notion of true self versus the self that gets manipulated by parental expectations, comparisons with our peers, and so forth?
Right. So before I talk about true self, we all have to understand this one concept, that the person I am today has been created. That the person I am today was either molded by what society told me or what I believed I should be, what I thought that were expected out of me. So I am someone today that has been created. But beyond that creation, every single person has something we call the true self. And that is the voice of your honest integrity, something that does not compare, that voice that does not judge, that voice that does not say you're right or wrong, that voice that is true and stands alone and has been able to stand alone by itself since the beginning of time. So to find that joy and happiness, we have to connect with beyond the layers of thought, expectation, doubt, and fear, and all of these things that we've been conditioned to. We have to connect with that true, authentic place, which is in the heart, which is why if you're not connected to it, you had that big gaping hole in your heart like I did. It's that voice, and some people might understand this as the voice of unconditional love, voice of oneness.
Well, that's a very powerful concept, this word, unconditional love. And when we think about that, again, it is this sense that despite the things that we do that are good, that are so-called bad, or any of these categories, despite how we feel, every moment of our existence, we are being showered with love. Our heart continues to beat on its own. Our lungs breathe without us telling it. Hormones are circulating through our body to make chemical reactions occur that are necessary for life. All of these gifts are being given to us every second, and we have that unconditional love. But what you're really getting to, though, is that you're focused on not being distracted by the external, but by saying there is something in me that is timeless. And by connecting to that timeless, that has a relationship for you with happiness and joy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because I look to nature for a lot of answers, and Ilchi also teaches that look to nature for your answers. And I find a lot of wisdom in observing a tree. So a tree, it just stands still on its own, whether we humans come to scratch our initials on the wood, or if the wind blows, the tree is still there and just lets things come and go naturally without hating the human being who's scratching my bark, that kind of balance and stillness. And I think balance is a really key word, because a lot of people, when I ask them, what do you want? They say, I want balance. Right? That's kind of coming back to that alignment, because a lot of the times if we're operating on emotions or different expectations and thoughts, we're looking at the world in a skewed way. So if we're observing everyone like this and observing all phenomena like this, or on the other side, if you're observing life like this, you can't really see clearly. The only way to see clearly is if your mind is right here, and you can see everything straight. This is what we call true self. This is ego, and this is also ego, but this is true self right here.
I love that you use the example of the tree. It brings me back. I was fortunate enough to be invited to New Zealand with many of the people from Body and Brain. And I was able to meditate under a tree that was literally thousands of years old. I mean, it was incredible how old this tree was. It was the biggest, unbelievable size tree, but its longevity was incredible. And as I sat there, sort of for the moment thinking about whatever the issues were that I was delivering to the world that day in my mind, the tree seemed to be talking back to me saying, you know, I've seen it all, son. There's nothing new here. Why don't you just calm down for a minute and just be in the moment? And under my protective shelter, everything is fine. Now you go ahead and focus in on true self, and we can connect there, but leave the rest of that out because there's no new news to me. So I love that example of the tree. Here's something that Ilchi says about this in his book. He says, how many hours have we spent in anguish, wandering in search of ourselves? There is no greater blessing than finding that self. It is the miracle of miracles. It is a greater miracle than healing disease or winning the lottery. Only you can find and create your value for yourself. Your value is precious, not because other people acknowledge it. That's just what you said, but because you can create and give it meaning for yourself. Your life can begin anew with the discovery of your true self. And I think that really is kind of important. How do you sort of start thinking about the work that it takes, the effort? What are the kind of things we can start to do once we've made a sense of understanding the importance of connecting to the timeless part of us that's inside of us? How do we actually start to get there?
Yeah. So looking back on my journey, I feel like people who go through a spiritual journey, they all, no matter what background you're from, what your job was before, I feel like we all go through the same kind of like awakening stage. So first of all, I want to tell people out there who are listening that if you have this feeling inside that something is not totally right, or I could be happier, or I feel like something is missing, that is the beginning of something inside of your heart, your true self, trying to lift its head and say, hello, I'm ready to come out. So when you feel that, then please know that this is your true self trying to awaken. And then next, I recommend joining a community of people that you see as role models, people whose lives that you want to emulate, because that's very important. When you first start on a spiritual journey, of course you can do it alone, but it's much easier when you have people who walk down that path before you, who can say, hey, Linda, that's the next step right there. Take a step right there. Okay, and then you take that step, and then you take the next step right there. And also, a big thing in spirituality or finding your true self is you have to find a community. Because that community will take care of you, and that community will put you back in line when you're wandering off course.
That's a great example, because doing it alone is really very difficult, and it takes to have guides. And I think what you're saying is find some spiritual guides that who can help you, because when we try to do this work, it's easy to be distracted. It's easy to sort of get frustrated because, again, this is not something that comes naturally to most people. They have to sit and really work it over time. I know that I have been tracing my own development in this regard. And from the moment I began to become aware of a sense of true self inside of me, a timelessness, soul, whatever words you want to use, the more when I became aware of it, then I began the work of trying to grow that awareness into better closeness and greater proximity. But I'll tell you, there were many days when I would sit quietly in a room and contemplate these things and feel like I was making no progress. I wasn't, like when you're in your former jobs or any of our jobs, we have performance measures, we have goals and objectives. I don't think we can look at the spiritual quest in the same way as having metrics that we can sort of chart out on an Excel spreadsheet. I don't think that works it didn't work for me. Did it work for you?
No, absolutely not. I think that spiritual journey we takes a totally different mindset and totally different kind of attitude when we go on there. And actually, I heard in my own spiritual journey that the biggest thing that will get in your way of spiritual growth is the calculating mind. The mind that says, oh, I meditated for 2 hours, so I should feel blank. Or I put in 7 days of training, I should feel blank. That mind that wants to calculate, I put A, so I should get B. I put X, so I should get Y. So doing the actions, doing the meditation or doing the training because you expect that as a result of what you put in. But the biggest thing in spiritual practice that I learned from Ilchi Lee is sincerity.
Oh.
Like a mother who raises her child without the expectation of, okay, I'm going to grow Linda because in 18 years, she's going to pay me all back when she has a job. You know, mothers don't raise their kids that way, right? I'm growing this child because it's my return investment. You know, they don't raise their kids that way. They just raise the kid without even knowing if this kid is going to grow up to be a drug addict, without knowing if this kid is going to be a successful president. We don't know, but the mother puts in all of her love, sincerity, and care into the child. Same thing when you go on your spiritual journey. You put that same sincerity, care, and love for your true self just because that's the right thing to do.
This is a very profound point that you are making. And I think I just want to really underscore this because, again, if we want to we're talking today about experiencing joy and happiness in our lives. And what you're saying, and I think saying it very well, is if we're going to have that experience of joy, that means we have to understand true self, be true to our true selves, and then grow that. And what you're saying is sometimes even in doing that, automatically doesn't convey joy because we have a tendency to look for, direct one-to-one outcomes. I put energy in, I do this, I'm doing all the right things. How come I'm not happier? And I think what you're saying is, and this is a very important spiritual concept in many religions and many spiritual practices, and that is to separate out the act from the outcome, that we have pure intent, pure desire, doing it because the joy is in the doing, not in the results that are expected. And I think that's the differentiation that you're making. And I think it's a very important one.
Yes. And the joy of observing yourself do the right thing, doing the meditation to connect with yourself. Because meditation at the end of the day is spending time with yourself, right? Doing anything that is spiritual, going to trainings or anything like that is spending time with yourself. It's putting coins in your piggy bank. You're investing in your own growth and in your own self. And because that's the right thing to do, to grow and to develop into your higher self, you find joy in knowing that you're doing right by you.
Beautiful. Well, I want to just, as we close that particular point and move on, I just want to speak to those of you who are like me, and that is those who are still early in their journey, who are still learning and still growing. And I'm just sort of want to share to everyone who's sort of like me out there. And that is every day that you sit quietly and devote yourself to the timeless you and purifying the timeless you, don't worry about whether you quote unquote make progress or have the solution that day. Don't worry about that. It's simply the sincerity of your act. It is simply the process of doing it with the right intent being aligning yourself with your highest values. Leave out the worry about the measurable outcome and just enjoy. And I'll tell you what I have at least learned is that is where great joy and happiness every day, just being and committing myself to something larger than myself. And so I would just give you that. Let's move on to talking about the relationship between joy and our bodies. Managing our bodies can be a very great way to experience greater joy and happiness. And I wonder what your experience teaches you about that.
Yes, so I feel that joy comes actually from managing your physical body well. I feel without your physical health, there's no joy. Because even if you have the greatest intention in your mind, you have all the love in the world, if you're lying sick in your bed, it's all useless, right? If you can't move your body to spread that, because a big part of joy, I've noticed, is that joy grows when you share it. When you exchange that energy of joy with other people, it grows bigger and bigger, like you're feeding the flames of your heart. It grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And your physical body, because it's the vehicle for you to move around, meet people, and do things, and take part of life. If you don't have your physical health and physical body, it's nearly impossible to feel that joy because it makes you stationary and alone, and you can't do all the things your mind and heart want to do.
And a large part of that, I think, is also related to just having the energy to put into your growth and development. If you're always tired and your body is just depleted of any sense of enthusiasm and energy to apply to doing things, it becomes much more difficult to have the concentration and the stick-to-itness to make this journey, don't you think?
Right. And physical health is the foundation of our human existence. And when we're, like you said, when we're tired, our minds tend to go negative. We start to complain, we get emotional. Emotions are a big thing that cloud our judgment. So when we're physically depleted of energy, we tend to skew to the negativity and feed the negative emotions that get distracting and is the opposite of joy.
And those negative emotions that are distracting have another impact, I think, and that is they make us tense. And when we're tense, the energy can't flow. I'm holding my fist up, and if you hold your hand, I'm just so tense and tight, no joy.
Yes.
When I open my hand and reach out to you to engage you with openness and I'm relaxed and the energy is flowing, now I can connect with you, and all of a sudden, voila, joy and happiness.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about energy a little bit. And I know that one of the things that your work involves is understanding the energy centers in our body and how they can relate. If we can liberate those energy centers, I think that also could help us to experience joy and happiness. Isn't that true?
Yeah, so the energy centers in our body, we call them chakras. And if you're familiar with chakras, they're basically just 7 energy centers along our spine from the top of our head to our tailbone that we say it corresponds to different characteristics, personalities, energy levels, different levels of thought. So for example, your heart chakra right here, of course, is associated with the emotion of love and joy. So if your heart chakra, if your heart energy center, because love and joy are energies, if your heart is really closed and blocked off and you're not circulating any energy in here, then it's very difficult to open your heart and let that joy come out because it's shriveled inside. The energy center is shriveled inside. So the energy centers actually are everything when you're dealing with stuff like love and joy.
Beautiful. I know that from my own practice that when I am involved with opening up those heart chakras, and if I sort of touch them and pound them a little bit, tap them and open up that and put my mind to that, and I start to open up that, boy, the love just not only flows in, but the love flows out. And I just find that to be an incredibly liberating thing. So everybody there now who's watching us, if you're feeling a little bit less joyful than you want to be, stop for a minute, close your eyes, and do gentle tapping around your chest area where your heart is, and put your intent, just like you're doing. That's the way to, and have a positive intent to say, I'm opening up my heart. You will be amazed at all the beautiful birds that come flying out into the world. And I guarantee you, it is hard not to smile when that happens.
Absolutely.
You talked about our minds, and let me move to the relationship between happiness, joy, and mind. And I've met so many people, who basically are angry today. And my anger, and by the way, I have really good reasons to be angry today. Something in the news that just makes me so mad, and I can just, this person harmed me, and I have a righteous, legitimate beef with them, and I am entitled to my upsetness with this person. That doesn't seem to work too well on the joy side.
Right. So the Buddha has a really good quote that I really love about anger. The Buddha said that anger is like drinking poison with the intent of killing the other person.
Say it again. I love that.
Anger is drinking poison with the intent of killing the other person.
Beautiful, beautiful. Just so futile. One of the phrases that I've also gotten from being around people like you that I've been learning is that my emotions are not me, they're mine. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Yes, so I'm going to go back to the example that you gave about I have so much reason to be angry. So I want to tell people that happiness and your emotions, happiness, joy, sadness, all of that stuff, your emotions They're yours and they don't define you. And what that means is, if they're yours, you have the power to choose which emotion you want to place in your mind and place inside of your body. Because think about it, if you so define yourself as this anger right now, then you're powerless to control it, because this anger now controls you. But if you recognize that these emotions are yours, and now you have the power. Okay, this circumstance made me very angry, but do I choose to react to that anger, or do I choose to grab the joy and choose a different information than what everything out around me is telling me? That's true power.
True power. And I hope that everybody gets that. I mean, it's just amazing. I meet so many people who just feel justified in their upsetness. But at the end of the day, as you said, the only person that's harmed is you. Whether or not you are right legally and you have a great argument, at the end of the day, we poison ourselves. One of the things that also causes a lot of these emotions these days is the direct manipulation of people through fear. I am very discouraged when I see the social movements today that seek to separate us from our different tribes, that my tribe is against your tribe, whether it's your religion against my religion, your color against my color, your nationality. One of the great things I like about working with people like you, that you're from an entirely different environment than I am. I don't know whether you've noticed, but I'm an African-American man. And I think I've noticed that you are a Korean woman. And our cultures are very different. The way I was raised, I'm also a couple of years older than you are.
Just a little.
One or two. I was raised very, very differently than you were raised. But at the end of the day, you and I are in common cause with each other. We are together. We're talking today as friends, as sharing each other's spiritual journey, our positive, joyful experiences, and we are not being manipulated by anyone. We're choosing to cross these artificial divides, and I think that's a really important lesson that we all need to find ways of doing. Don't you think?
Right. And that's because we're both talking to ourselves from our true selves. We're having this podcast discussion with something true and honest inside of us, without thinking, oh, he's different from me, so I don't know how I should approach him. I don't know what I should say. A lot of us approach other people that way. We just look at the surface and we say, oh, right, wrong, friend, enemy, good, bad. We judge all these things. But when you approach people from that heart space, that true self, that place of joy and love, then we can see that beyond our skin. I saw something really interesting. They lined up a bunch of different people from different races. They had Asian, like African American, Latino. They had all these different people, and they took an X-ray of them. And they said, and they said, find the gay person, find the African American, find the Asian. And the point was that beyond the skin, you can't tell who's who. They're all the same. And it's so silly that we don't see that beyond this skin, beyond our ideas, that we are all the same thing. We are all the muscles, we're all bones, we are all made of the same stuff.
That is so beautiful. In this point that I get a lot of joy from is I travel a lot, and I'm in airports all the time, and I see all these different people from everywhere. And as I look at them, I sort of have this fun game that I play, and I imagine that great creator takes a cup and dips it in the ocean and pours it into a vessel and sets them on their way. And then another cup, and he puts it in a different vessel, and they're all walking away. And I'm looking at all these people in the airport, and I'm starting to realize that we're all the same ocean. We're the same water. It's all the same, just in different bottles. And now I'm looking at that person who's different from me physically and realizing we're the same essence. And that thought makes me smile. And I guess people must think I'm a little nuts walking through the airport, because I'm having these constant bursts and jolts of joy by feeling connected to other people, which is the direct opposite of the way I feel when I watch TV news, where I'm now being encouraged to only want to be around people whose water is poured in brown bottles or American bottles or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, finding these moments of joy are great. Well, one last thing I want to also just touch on in this full 360-degree experience of how to have more happiness and joy in our lives is, and you began with it, and I think it's a good way to start to think about concluding, and that is having a sense of purpose. And this is something, again, that Ilchi talks about. And let me just bring you his words for your reflection. He says that feeling incredible joy when you love and accept others unconditionally, when you share what you have without calculating your own interests, when you sacrifice yourself for others out of what arises in your heart, when you share your energy of pure love, you discover a wellspring of joy you haven't been able to feel in any other way. And he talks about this as a part of a philosophy called, and let me see if I'm saying it properly, the word Hongjik, Hongik. How do you pronounce that in Korean?
Hongik.
Hongik.
Yes.
This is a philosophy that many Koreans have grown up in. Can you talk a little bit more about what that's all about?
Yes, so Hongik is actually the founding philosophy that founded the nation that we call Korea right now. And it's sad because a lot of Koreans nowadays, they don't even know about Hongik. Yeah. So Hongik basically is an idea that says we need to do stuff that mutually benefit each other. So in other words, what benefits me benefits you, what benefits you benefits me. A lot of the times, especially in Western culture, I feel like we have this idea of sacrifice where I give up my well-being for your well-being. And although, yes, that may feel good in the moment, if you build that over time, people build a lot of anger and resentment. Like, how come no one takes care of me? I hear that a lot in people who take care of many other people. They say, how come nobody takes care of me? That's resentment, right? So that is not very healthy because you have to give up something in your own happiness and joy for someone else. But Hongik actually says what's really good must make you happy and must make the other person happy as well. So you lift both people without sacrificing one person to lift the other. It's lifting both people at the same time. And that's the philosophy that Ilchi really wants to spread because nowadays we have so much competition. Our society is built on competition. That if I get to the top, that means there's so many people I had to trample over to get to the top. Right? And that causes that discord and unhappiness and chaos and competition because we're all scrambling, pulling at each other's hairs to get to the top. But if we have this idea of Hongik, I could not do any harm to other person because I know that what makes me happy, what makes me fulfilled, and what makes me truly successful has to also benefit you as well. So we go up together without competing and trampling over each other.
It's almost as if you're saying that I can't be happy unless you're happy too.
Right.
And I think that's a great way. One of the ways in which I know that you are trying to do that is being part of a movement of that, again, being involved in issues outside of yourself, being concerned with connecting with other people. And there's a project that I know is near and dear to your heart called the Earth Village Project. Could you just share a little bit about what that's about and why it gives you such joy?
Yes, so the Earth Village project is what Ilchi Lee is doing in New Zealand. It's like a retreat center where people of all ages, all colors, all backgrounds can go there amongst beautiful nature in New Zealand. As you mentioned, there's many trees over there. So amongst beautiful nature in New Zealand, and just take some time to ask those essential existential questions. Who am I? What do I want? And as you talked about, purpose. Find your purpose because purpose is so important in giving your life direction. A lot of people, they live very busy. They work hard, do all these things with a lot of energy, but without purpose, it's like you spend a lot of energy doing many things, but you're not building anything, right? So that purpose will give you that guiding compass as to align myself with this. Okay, does this fulfill me in this way or not? And then you can save a lot of energy. But the Earth Village Project is a place that Ilchi created that people can come and get away from the busyness of daily life, get away from the cell phones, get away from the Wi-Fi, get away from the bad media, get away from all these things that skew us, as I mentioned, and come back to nature. communicate with yourself, have time for yourself, have time to communicate with nature, and through that, find the answers to what do I want? Where is my life going? Where did I come from? What is my purpose? Find these things by returning back to you amongst beautiful, quiet nature. I went to Earth Village recently. I highly, highly recommend everyone goes there. The thing about New Zealand is that it's so natural that you don't even have to try to meditate. Meditation happens naturally because it's so quiet, so pristine, so pure.
Well, that's a beautiful thought. And as we start to close out, I would just say that we want you to be able to go to, I've been to this New Zealand retreat. It is absolutely wonderful. However, if you don't have the opportunity, the time, or the money to go to New Zealand today, you go to New Zealand in your mind. That there is a park somewhere near you. There is a park inside of your mind. There is a beautiful garden in your own mind. And you can go to that park anytime you want, but certainly go outside and take a walk in nature and be there. It's all around us, and there's no excuse. So don't be saying, well, I don't have enough money to go to New Zealand, therefore I can't go ahead and start on my journey. That's not going to work. That doesn't happen. And when you go and you sit quietly, as we just summarize some of the themes we said today, I think we didn't say it explicitly, but it's woven in everything we've said, Linda, and that is letting go of attachments. I think that we have to learn to say at some point, I have to follow and be in complete harmony with my true self, my divine, eternal self, and not worry about wealth and material. Of course, we all have to have enough to eat. We have to have a place to live. No one is saying that those things are not important. But to be so overwhelmingly driven by the acquisition of things and money, to be overwhelmed by the fight for power and prestige, to be overwhelmed by the demands of other people. At some point, as you have been indicating throughout this show, we have to be true to ourselves, let go of those attachments, and be able to have the time for quiet meditation that will advance our soul's freedom. And I think that's really what you've been sharing with us today. Any last thoughts from you?
Well, I just want to speak a little bit more about the attachments thing. So the attachment, because a lot of people have attachments. So attachments, just understand that we're attached to things that are temporary. So to find joy, to find your purpose, to find your true self, to let go of attachments, all these things that spiritual people want, I really, really highly recommend returning to yourself, finding what it is that you want, and becoming totally honest with your condition. Because if you know exactly where you are, you know what you can do to get yourself to the place that you want to be. Find a community, find a guide, find a teacher like I have who guided me through my spiritual journey, and you will for sure get what it is that you want from this lifetime.
I love that. And as we close out, there's one exercise that is perhaps the most important of all for feeling happiness right now, today. And I want everybody this is a very tough exercise. So I want you to get ready for this now. Get yourselves all geared up. And that exercise is just what you are now doing, Linda. I want everybody to smile. Because when we smile, it is very difficult to be in a bad mood or upset. And we can smile just because we want to smile. So everyone who's watching this podcast right this moment, practice 10 times smiling. And I guarantee you will have a much better day. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been a wonderful guest. And to all of those who are with us, we look forward to the next step on this journey together. We have many, many more topics to talk about, but we really also want this to be your podcast. So as you will see up on the screen, there is a slide that will tell you how to reach us. If you want more information, if you want to be able to go for online education, that's available. And if you have questions to ask me or things you want me to bring up in future shows, I am your servant. And I today am one very happy servant. So everyone, take care and see you next time as we take the journey on deciding to live 120 years. Bye, Linda. Take care.
Bye.